Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Well, we are in the bunker here, the basement of the State House, your temporary office. It's Secretary of State Gregg Amore. And this is your first time on the show, so it's a pleasure to have you on for the first time. And how do you like being Secretary of State so far?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate. I listen all the time, so
thank you.
I'm aware of the podcast. I'm enjoying the job. I'm really enjoying the public outreach, and I'm really enjoying what we have kind of focused on, which is civic engagement and civic education. That's obviously my background as a longtime history and civics teacher, but we've really beefed up that division within the Department of State, and we're excited about the programs that we're about to kick off, including next week where we start to go to high schools throughout the state, and I'm teaching a civics class, a 40-minute civics class on the history of voting rights and voter suppression, and we're excited about it.
That's amazing. I think that's something that jumps out about you that excites. It's a nonpartisan, exciting thing. Civic engagement. It seems like it's way down. You know, for me as a kid in high school, that was basically that and the music program where that's what got me in the building was history, civics, so on and so forth. And it seemed like I was saying, it's just anecdotal, but you don't see or feel the same type of aggressive understanding of the layers and levels of government and process in general. Do you sense that?
Yeah, in fact, we were just speaking, Representative Newberry and I were at an event the other day, and we were talking about this. We co-sponsored a bill to require civic education in Rhode Island high schools, the Civic Literacy Act. It took us 5 years to get that across the finish line. And, you know, we were determined to have Representative Newberry's name on the top of that bill. And I think we probably would have passed it sooner had my name been on the top. But we were really cognizant of the fact that we needed a bipartisan bill that required at least a semester of civics. But the key part of this bill, which is now being implemented, which is exciting, is that it has a project-based requirement. So a hands-on, student-centered requirement where kids have to interact with either their local, state, or federal government. In Rhode Island, you can do that. And I think it's going to be a game changer because kids will get excited. We're in the early planning phases of Project Insight, or bringing back Project Insight, which was very popular in the 70s and 80s, which brought students from around the state, Central High School to Westerly High School, into the State House, into the courthouse, meet with local media, and immerse themselves in state government for 3 days with a stay at the Marriott, workshops at night, discussing current issues, discussing how they think they would move toward improving life in Rhode Island. I was a part of Project Insight in the days. Many future civic leaders were part of Project Insight. We're going to try to bring that back. So I think this is the time to really talk about civic education. It's at a critical point in American history where we need to know foundationally how the government works so that we can act. But to your point, I think one of the reasons that it has been on the back burner is I think a lot of educators are leery about discussing political topics, and you can't discuss civics without discussing politics. Not your political preference, but politics in general. And people are gun shy, and they don't want attention from the listeners on WPRO or other places, or on Facebook or on Twitter, and they get nervous about that. And so I think teachers have been shying away. In high school, I critical thinking is really important, and alternative point of view is really important, and offering students all of the information and letting them decide is kind of what we're supposed to do as teachers.
That's really interesting, and you're right. There are these groups out there. That's a national thing, but we certainly have it here in Rhode Island where, and I don't know what kind of reach they have. I mean, let's be honest about it. But at the same time, they're there, and they seem to be monitoring what's going on in the classroom and picking fights and posting photos of certain people on Facebook. And I wonder if, as a teacher, does that disrupt your ability to engage in critical thinking because of this sort of citizen watchdog, or at least that's how they would identify
I think
themselves?
it has. I think especially if you're a young educator, right, and you're just finding your footing. But I guess it applies to somebody who's at the end of their career as well, not wanting to rock the boat. I just, a teacher's job is to present information, ask questions, and get students to critically think. So I think we can all do that. I tell this story a lot. My oldest daughter had a great AP U.S. history teacher, but in one of the classes, he said, Social Security is a Ponzi scheme. And she came home and she said, Dad, we haven't done Social Security yet. We haven't talked about the New Deal yet. What do you think about that? And, I couldn't help but think, boy, this is one of those blow-up questions that could, be a social media bonfire. And I thought it was great because she came home and asked me about it. We talked about it. I suggested she read a couple of things, and she went back in and they had a discussion. And that's what I want out of education. I want people thinking, asking questions, and not taking at face value what somebody says or what their opinion is. And we've got to get back to that. But you can't do any of this without the foundational understanding of how government works.
There's a special election coming up. Surprise. Welcome to the office. Congressman Cicilline will be stepping down June 1st. We're already seeing people lining up. By the way, are you running for Congress? I think someone, Dan York, asked you this. Yeah, that's not happening. So got that out of the way. Any update in terms of when you expect that special election would happen? Procedurally, it requires the governor to issue, in layman's terms, the governor has to say, hey, we've got to do this special election. But have you had any additional communication since last week on that special election?
Sure. And I've joked with people that we wanted a special election to get our feet wet, our elections team feet wet. But I was looking like at a Warren town council race. Would have been a nice. But we're excited about this because it's a test, and we're in constant communication with the governor's office and with the Board of Elections, and we have mapped out options for the governor when he does call for the election. Those options are on the table, and they are consistent with federal law. We do have an inconsistency with state law right now, and that deals with the MOVE Act, which deals with overseas ballots, military and overseas voter empowerment. And we're required to get mail ballots to send mail ballots to our military and overseas citizens 45 days ahead of the election. Our special election law has candidates declare 39 and 40 days prior to the election. So we're bound by federal law. We're working on this now. I believe the legislature will act. If they don't, I still think we're on solid ground because what we've offered the governor and what the Board of Elections, and I want to give the Board of Elections a lot of credit here, we have worked incredibly well together on this issue. No one saw this coming. And we've mapped out a plan. We have a plan. It's going to be the governor's call when Congressman Cicilline resigns. But I know that you'll hear from the governor's office well prior to that to lay out what the process will be so that candidates can go through the required process that they're going to have to go through and plan.
So for those who are wondering, okay, the congressman steps aside, whether it's May 31st or June 1st is his actual last day, whatever. It's going to be, we're looking at it at an end of summer at earliest for a primary because
at earliest it's August 8th. That's the earliest we can run a primary under all of the federal requirements that I mentioned, and then all the procedural requirements that candidates get signatures, in this case 500 signatures, that those signatures are verified, that we have an opportunity to create a ballot. So all that has to take place, and we've built a calendar in so that we're meeting all those requirements. The governor could choose the next date, which would be a September primary, and then it moves to a November election, or he could push it out. I mean, this is personal preference is that Rhode Island be represented as soon as possible. We don't want to extend this too far because then we lose representation.
Right. So, and also the idea of an election in the middle of the summer. I mean, it's not part of government. It's sort of like the extra governmental way of doing business in the state. August 8th, that's a day where how many people are going to be on Block Island and as far removed from politics as they possibly could be. So do you weigh that in terms of you or the governor or even philosophically, voter turnout and engagement versus a month earlier?
Yeah, it's a fine line, right? You want representation as quickly as possible, especially in a Congress that is so closely divided. But you also want voter engagement. Now, something that counters the summer in Rhode Island argument is that we now have 20 days of early voting. We have no excuse mail voting. So you have access to your ballot. Will you be paying attention? The data that I've seen, and John Marion from Common Cause and I have talked about this, there's not much difference in turnout across the country between a summer and an early fall or late summer election. I think this will garner a lot of attention. It's the only show in town. It's going to have federal attention, obviously, anytime. And this is a heavily leaning Democratic district, but it will receive a lot of attention. And I think because of that, because it's the only show in town, I think people will be engaged.
What do you think about, I know you've been asked this before, the Congressman Cicilline's decision to stay on for what'll be 3 months or so, more than 3 months past when he announced he was going to the Rhode Island Foundation. Is that the best move for the state of Rhode Island in terms of his delaying an exit while he'll be there representing the state? He also has indicated that he kind of has to shift to a more benign, nonpartisan role because of his upcoming role with the Rhode Island Foundation. Would it have been better for the state if Congressman Cicilline said, you know what, I'm resigning March 15th and we can get this show on the road in terms of a special election?
I think it would have been easier for us to plan the process. I'm not sure about better for the state. I think the decision he made, I'm sure, is based on some of the responsibilities he has in Washington, D.C. that require his attention for an extended period of time. I'm not sure if it's aligned with the break, congressional break. I don't know. So, I've preferred not to comment on that because my focus is really doing this special election well and working with the Board of Elections, working with the governor to make sure we have a really solid process here in place.
One thing that your predecessor, Secretary Gorbea, really wanted to do was create a physical space for Rhode Island historical documents, so on and so forth. I remember touring. We did a tour episode. If somebody wants to go back like 3 years on the podcast, they can find it. Former Secretary of State Gorbea and I walking around on Westminster Street, the current space, and she was just glowing with excitement of the notion of creating this, I can't remember if it was a Rhode Island history or civic engagement physical space.
Correct.
Do you support that? Would you like to see that?
We're full steam ahead on that project. I shared Secretary Gorbea's enthusiasm, and we talked a lot about it when I was here as a state rep and someone who obviously is a history buff, a history teacher. And I think timing was an issue. We had not yet built new schools, refurbished schools. The budget was a little tighter. Civic education was not on the front burner. The Department of State under Secretary Gorbea did great work in prepping for a possible new archives and history museum, Rhode Island History Museum. And the site plans are done and the groundwork is done. In our transition, we put a transition subcommittee together to look at this issue only. That work continues. I have been meeting with the governor, meeting with the leaders of the House and Senate, the Speaker and the Senate President. We're going forward with an effort to build a Rhode Island Archives and History Museum and Education Center, really. We lease the space. We're an original 13 colony, original 13 state. We have incredible documents but we can't display them because of the confined nature of the space, because of the location. This could be a real asset for the state, not only for our own residents who will, I'm sure, visit and take in those documents, but for outside tourism, global tourism, folks from the United States coming in. I know I'm one of those people. When I go to a state, I visit the Capitol, I visit the museum. Massachusetts has a great museum. So many states. Tennessee just built one. Washington, D.C. is building one now. We should have our own space where we can display these documents. We have the Declaration of Independence, one of the original 13 copies. We have that. It's available to us, but it's not being displayed. I don't know if you've been to the Charter Museum here. We display the Charter of 1636, and it's open and accessible, but it's safe. And that's what we want to do here. And we're leasing the space. We're the only state in the country that leases the archive space. Mm-hmm. So we should have our own space, and we're going to push really hard on this. It's kind of part of the overall civic engagement package.
I think back to the State of the State address, which was now 2 months ago, roughly a month and a half ago, something like that. You got the loudest, most raucous ovation, naturally, as someone who came out of the House, and out of the General Assembly as a whole. Talk about the pipeline that you have with the General Assembly. Is it something that you have as sort of an extra trick in your arsenal to be able to forge or either get legislation introduced and passed, just making things happen? How important is that network?
Well, I think relationships are important in all walks of life, but certainly in politics. And I was here for 10 years, and I built a whole host of relationships across the aisle as well. I don't think it's the advantage is structural and procedural. I come into the legislative process knowing how it works, knowing how the budget works, really understanding the budget, because I served 8 years on House Finance, chaired the education subcommittee there. So it's an advantage to me to be able to know how things work. We talked about, understanding how government works. And then to know the key players is real. But, everybody has their own priorities, and people can give me as great a share. That was very nice, but I did have a home field advantage there in the House. But I still have to make the case on the merits. What I have is the ability to access all these folks because I know them. I've worked with so many of them on so many issues over the years that access helps me make my case. And I think that's an advantage for sure.
When we think about Rhode Island, it's interesting because it's basically a city-state. At the same time, there's a lot of differences. I mean, I went to high school at Chariho, and I'll tell you right now, there's not only differences between Charlestown, Richmond, and Hopkinton. You can go to a neighborhood in Richmond, and it's radically different from another Richmond neighborhood or Charlestown. So and I think everywhere is like this, but it's pronounced because we're so compressed geographically. We have a high population density, second highest in the country, I believe. So as Secretary of State, you're an ambassador for all these different elements. There's a rural aspect that has a lot of different elements. There's an urban aspect, so many different challenges and so many different strengths. How do you, as one of the state officers, how do you balance the needs and wants of a tight but also radically different state from mile marker to mile markers sometimes?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think in terms of our office, our desire is to be the Secretary of State in the Department of State for the entire state. Our business services division serves every business in the state in a multitude of ways, and that doesn't. You can be from Richmond or you can be from Richmond Street in Providence. It doesn't matter. I think on civic engagement, we're booked across the state. I'm going to be at high schools in the woods, and I'm going to be at high schools here in Providence. So, our goal is to follow the law and serve the public. I think I have another advantage in that I spent 20 plus years coaching baseball and hockey at the high school level. Yep. And so I've been in every community in this, and then I was the athletic administrator. I've been in every gym, every high school, every community. I know the state well because of my background in athletics and education. I'm one of those traditionalists that believes that, you represent the state. And even when I was a state representative, the title is state representative. Yes, I had a District 65, and it was very important to me, but I was a state representative. I was making decisions and votes on the whole, not just from my narrow part of the state. So, I think that's kind of old-fashioned now to think about collective good, but it's really important, and we talked about this the other day. The nation has really shifted hard toward an individual rights-centric nation. And I would like to talk as much as I can about moving back to a collective good, general welfare type nation where individual rights are important, but so too is the health of our community. Right. And I think we've seen the fraying of that, and we need to kind of push back to that. And that starts with civility. And I think one of the reasons that I may have received such a warm welcome is I've always treated people with respect. I've disagreed fiercely on issues, but I've always treated with people with respect, and I listen to them. And if you're a critical thinker and you have a conversation, then on the ride home or at night before you go to bed, you say, okay, that person said this to me, and I can't let that go. I need to explore this more. And I think that's kind of how I'm going about this job. I'm willing to learn. During the campaign, we knocked doors in the reddest of districts and the bluest of districts. And I was one of the few statewide candidates that literally knocked doors every week to meet Rhode Islanders. And I wanted to hear from them. And, I didn't go to Republican doors during the primary, but I went to all doors during the general, and it was valuable.
It's interesting because you can scale up your comments there to the survival of the species.
Correct.
Whether you're talking climate change, nuclear weapons, I mean, just the diversity in the world right now. It's unprecedented. It's a scary time. I mean, you can, as a historian, you can look back and there's been a lot of scary times with less tools to navigate it. But what's your take on that? That bridging on that civility, scaling it outside of Rhode Island. Just what are we going to do to get on track?
I'm an optimist. So, and I know that throughout the ebbs and flows of history, we have been here, and we have pulled ourselves out. I think that the difference today is the access to information and the ability for all people to kind of express themselves in a way that is not human, right? There's no human connection. When you put people together in a room, you can see their humanity. So I'm a big believer in. I think one of the reasons that the Rhode Island General Assembly, for the most part, is cordial, and you've witnessed the floor debates, for the most part, is very cordial. It's because we're together all the time for a brief period of time. We're in small committee rooms. You have to be in the room to vote. It's not like the House of Representatives where people are in and out and one person's on the floor talking to an empty chamber. You have to get to know these people. And, I consider many of the Republicans in the House my friends. They're good people. We disagree. And I said that in my remarks during the inauguration. We need to get back to respecting one another as Americans, as fellow Rhode Islanders, and then not look at each other as political enemies. These are positions that we take that we can have fierce disagreement about, but we can move on. And that's the most disturbing thing to me, is that we have reached a point where we're talking about people in a sense that it's evil versus good. And it's hard to come back from that. My staff here, our staff gives me a hard time because I'm a big Abraham Lincoln buff, and I've been reciting and referring to the Lyceum speech in 1838 before anybody knew he was Abraham Lincoln. He was a young state rep in Illinois, and he warned of our political institutions crumbling, and he warned of political violence. It's the famous quote where he talks about we're the authors of our own destruction, right? No one can destroy America, only Americans can. And that we're kind of at that point now where we have to start talking about the collective good more, and that's a goal that I've always had as a elected official, and I'll continue to do that. I have a bigger bully pulpit now, so I'll continue to do that.
Perhaps it'll be the Amore doctrine when it's all said and done. I know we're up against it. Just really quickly, putting on your athletic administrator and coaching hat at the high school level. I played a couple of sports in high school. I was a referee for 20 years in soccer. I left it. When I got back to Rhode Island, I found that just got completely out of control. We see a major, in terms of parents, oftentimes assistant coaches, frankly, that's where it got out of control. Referees there's a huge referee shortage in the state of Rhode Island right now, and nationally there is. Yeah. And we've seen referees killed, not necessarily here in the United States, but around the world. And, great coaches understand that you need great referees. It's not to say that you're not going to have a debate. I mean, sometimes the most passionate, heated debates, and especially in baseball, are a beautiful part of sport. But how do we get back using that notion of civility to a point where here in Rhode Island, in the Interscholastic League in particular, it's desirable for people who want to officiate in the league and sort of get that harmony back where, again, not to cut into competitiveness, not to cut into passion, but to me, I felt like it went off the rails where it became, I was being confronted in the parking lot by JV parents and things like this. And you're going, whoa, wait a second. This is this is not what it was when I first started doing this 20 years ago. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, you're right, first of all, and post-pandemic was the worst I had ever seen. The behavior of both parents and athletes, and some spectators that were not parents.
Yeah.
I mean, what we did at East Providence is we doubled down on our staff. We made sure that at events we had plenty of staff. Now, that's expensive, but it's worth the expense, because when you have faculty and staff around the site, let's say it's a basketball game, then students know and can connect with those folks. And so the student behavior is kind of taken care of, because they know there's going to be consequences. But you have to have that staffing. And then the other thing we did is we started to hold parent meetings, and we went through what is expected of spectator behavior. And we had frank conversations with people. And I think that's the difficult thing. You know, you're calling a parent into the athletic administrator's office, and you're having a heart-to-heart saying, look, your behavior is just horrific, and you're not going to be able to come into these games anymore. And how sad is that for you? You've watched your son or daughter play all these years. And so that's how we dealt with it, one situation at a time. And we made sure that when we saw behavior that was out of the norm, we reacted to it and talked to first, and then remove those people. But it's a serious issue. And I'll tell you this, the pandemic era games that were played without fans, our student athletes were so much more relaxed.
Definitely, yeah.
They were so much more relaxed. They were so much more. I don't want to use the wrong word here, but they understood that it was an athletic contest. It was not a show,
Yes.
and it was better. And that's sad. That's sad that no people in the stands was a better option than having a full crowd for the athletes. Never mind the officials, but for the athletes, you probably noticed that. So I think it's connected, right? It's connected to this civility factor that we're lacking, and that comes from leadership. I mean, you need Ed Cooley, who by the way does a great job. He got teched last night, but he does a great job with the officials. He usually does not go past the line, and then he's very respectful. If you've ever been close to the bench, you hear he's very respectful to the officials. He works them, but he's very respectful. And I think modeling good behavior is the key.
Completely agree. You don't want to sterilize it as well. And like sometimes those, I mean, there have been instances where someone's tossed from a game, that I'm on or whatever, and oftentimes that coach will end up on a phone call later, and it's mutual respect.
Right.
And it's you don't want to sterilize it to the point where it's everyone be quiet and sit here and just nod. At the same time, when it gets to be like you described, that it's a window into the civility problems that we have as a whole, and it's disturbing because high school sports are so important and fundamental to community
Absolutely.
Identity and all of those things. And boys, it's tough to watch right now.
Yeah, and that's why hiring a good coach is important. I mean, I used to try to tell my parents in our meetings, I'll take care of anything on the ice, on the diamond. Let me take care of that. And then the athletes don't have to, and you don't have to. Trust me with that. And again, modeling good behavior is really important.
Gregg Amore, he's the Secretary of State in Rhode Island. We're in the final hours of your bunker setting here. Love it. And as always, thanks so much for your time. And
thanks, Bill.
Look forward to more.
Love being here. Thanks.
Pleasure. This episode is brought to you by the University of Rhode Island Online, who are offering a cannabis certificate program. The legalization of recreational cannabis that went into effect last year can open doors for your career. If you are already in the industry or wondering what is the best path to break into the cannabis field, the University of Rhode Island has that program I just mentioned to help you become highly competitive in numerous areas of the cannabis industry. Fully accredited by URI's College of Pharmacy, their certificate program is 100% online, and it can be completed in just 2 semesters. The next application deadline for the summer 2023 session is April 4th. Coming right up. Mark your calendars, right? Courses start May 9th. Learn more at uri.edu/online/cannabis or give them a call, 401-874-5280.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.